The laughter echoed across the banquet hall like the sound of broken glass. It was sharp, cruel, and it cut into me deeper than any knife could. My niece, Danielle, stood with a glass of champagne in one hand and a mocking smile plastered across her perfectly made-up face. "Who invited the fat pig?" she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. The words were not whispered. They were hurled, loud enough for the entire table of guests to hear. Heads turned. Forks paused in midair. Conversations froze. And suddenly, all eyes in that glittering ballroom were on me. The aunt who had sacrificed everything to raise her after her mother died. The aunt she had once clung to like a lifeline. My body stiffened, my heart pounded, and shame spread across my skin like wildfire. Hello, beautiful people. You made it here for a reason, so don't stop now. Hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to see how far the story of revenge will travel. The room, decorated in dazzling crystal chandeliers and gold-draped curtains, suddenly felt like a stage. Danielle was the star, and I had been cast as the fool. She tipped her head back and laughed again, her friends joining in with uncomfortable giggles that stung even more than her words. I sat there, dressed in a simple navy blue gown, one I had saved for months to buy, clutching the napkin in my hand so tightly my knuckles whitened. I wanted to disappear into the velvet carpet beneath my feet, but a voice deep inside me whispered, "Do not flinch. Do not break. Watch." Danielle had always been cruel, but tonight she chose to make me her public spectacle. She sauntered around the table, her heels clicking with arrogance, her words slicing through the hushed silence. "Seriously, Aunt Maria," she continued mockingly, "did you not see the dress code? This isn't a buffet line, it's a gala. Next time, try not to embarrass me." Gasps rippled through the guests, some covering their mouths, others avoiding my gaze. The sting wasn't just in her words, but in the betrayal. I had given her everything: school fees, a roof, food, clothes, opportunities. And now, she called me a pig? Something shifted inside me that night. The humiliation, the shame, the betrayal, they burned together into a flame I had never felt before. I had endured years of mockery because of my size, whispered insults on buses, cruel giggles at restaurants, strangers pointing in shopping malls. I had endured them all silently. But this was different. This came from blood, from the very child I had raised as my own. And as she paraded herself with cruel laughter, something in my heart hardened into steel. Revenge was not just a desire, it was a promise. I didn't respond to her then. Instead, I lowered my eyes, swallowing my pain, letting her believe she had won. Danielle thrived on the attention, her beauty flashing like polished glass under the chandelier light, her slim body draped in designer silk. She smiled at the crowd like a queen who had defeated her rival. But little did she know, she had planted a seed inside me that night. A seed of wrath. And seeds, when watered by tears and humiliation, grow into forests of revenge. As the evening dragged on, I stayed silent. I let her bask in her false victory. But my mind was racing. I thought of every sacrifice I had made for her, working double shifts at the diner, selling jewelry, skipping meals so she could have lunch money. I remember the nights I stayed awake nursing her through sickness, the days I shielded her from cruel classmates. I remember the letters from colleges that came addressed to her, the pride in her eyes when she graduated. Pride that she had stolen from me. And now, the same girl who once held my hand in fear had turned her claws against me. The banquet ended with her still mocking me, her words ringing in my ears like a curse. Guests avoided me, not because they believed her words, but because shame has a way of isolating its victims. I walked home that night alone, the cold city air biting my skin, but the fire in my chest burning hotter with every step. By the time I reached my apartment, I was no longer the broken woman who had been humiliated in a ballroom. I was a woman reborn. And I knew one thing: Danielle would regret every syllable of those cruel words. Revenge, however, is not something to be served raw. It must be cooked slowly, seasoned with patience, garnished with strategy. And I had both time and patience. Danielle thought she was untouchable, beautiful, slim, the darling of her company. She was rising quickly, too quickly, in the corporate world, and she flaunted it shamelessly. Her boss adored her. Her colleagues envied her. She believed she was destined for greatness. But even the brightest stars can fall when gravity pulls, and I was determined to be the gravity that pulled her down. Weeks passed. Danielle never apologized. Instead, she spread stories about me, mocking my weight, calling me lazy, framing me as the bitter aunt who was jealous of her success. The more she climbed in her company, the more she pushed me further into the dirt. But little did she know, I had begun laying the groundwork for my revenge. I started reaching out to people, old friends, connections I had made through years of quiet work. I asked questions about her company. I learned who her boss really was. And when I discovered the truth, a smile curved my lips for the first time in weeks. Because Danielle's boss, her idol, her ticket to success, was a man who owed me everything. Years ago, I had given him a chance when no one else would. I had invested my savings into his fledgling business when banks turned him away. I had cooked meals for him when he couldn't afford food. I had believed in him when the world mocked him. And now he had risen into power, wealth, and influence. And Danielle had no idea that the man she admired above all else would one day bow before me. It happened on a cold Tuesday morning. Danielle had invited me, rather smugly, to a corporate event her company was hosting downtown. She didn't extend the invitation out of respect. No, she wanted me to be humiliated again, paraded like the fat, embarrassing relative she had labeled me as. "Just try not to eat too much," she had said mockingly over the phone, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I accepted without hesitation, hiding the fire in my chest beneath a calm tone. "Of course, Danielle," I replied sweetly. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The event was held in a sleek skyscraper that scraped the clouds, its glass walls glinting against the winter sun. I entered the lobby dressed in a black velvet gown, one that hugged my curves proudly. No shame, no fear. Heads turned as I walked in, not because I was grotesque, as Danielle had once painted me, but because I carried myself like a woman who knew her worth. Danielle spotted me immediately. She rolled her eyes and muttered something to her colleagues, who snickered behind manicured hands. The game was beginning. The room was buzzing with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Executives in tailored suits mingled with young employees desperate to impress. Danielle floated among them like a peacock, her designer dress glittering under the lights. She saw me standing near the refreshment table and couldn't resist another jab. "Oh, Aunt Maria," she said loudly, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. "So glad you could make it. I was worried there wouldn't be enough food left for the rest of us." The group erupted in laughter. My cheeks burned, but I smiled, because I knew what was coming. Then the crowd shifted, and a hush swept through the room. All eyes turned to the entrance as a tall, broad-shouldered man in an immaculate navy blue suit entered. His presence alone commanded respect. This was Mr. Raymond Carter, the CEO, Danielle's boss, and the man whose empire I had quietly helped build decades earlier. Whispers rippled through the employees. That's him. The big man himself. Danielle straightened, her face glowing with admiration. She had spoken about him endlessly, how he was her mentor, her guide, the key to her rising star. And now here he was. Raymond's eyes scanned the room as people scrambled to greet him. Danielle was already halfway across the floor, her heels clicking like desperate applause. "Mr. Carter," she called, her voice shrill with excitement. "Over here." He smiled politely, shook her hand briefly, and began making small talk with a circle of executives. Danielle beamed, trying to edge closer to his side, hungry for his approval. But then it happened. His eyes flickered past her, scanning the room. And when they landed on me, they froze. For a heartbeat, he looked stunned, as if he had seen a ghost. Then his face softened, his lips parting in disbelief. He excused himself from the group mid-sentence, leaving Danielle stranded in confusion. All eyes followed him as he crossed the room. Whispers filled the air. Danielle frowned, trying to follow his gaze. And when she saw that he was walking toward me, the fat pig she had mocked, her face drained of color. "Mariah." Raymond's voice was rich with awe, trembling with recognition. He reached me, his hand hesitating in the air before finally gripping both of mine firmly. "Mariah, my God, it's you." His eyes shone, and he bowed his head slightly, as though standing before royalty. Gasps erupted around us. Danielle's colleagues stared in disbelief. My niece herself stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her glass of champagne trembling in her hand. She looked as though the ground had been ripped from under her feet. I smiled warmly, though inside, satisfaction coursed through me like fire. "Raymond," I said softly, my voice steady. "It's been a long time." He shook his head, almost dazed. "Too long. You're the reason I'm standing here today. You're the reason I ever made it." He turned suddenly, addressing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming, "allow me to introduce you to Mariah Williams, the woman who believed in me when no one else did. Without her, this company would not exist." The room erupted in shock. Murmurs, gasps, and wide eyes spread like wildfire. Danielle's hand flew to her mouth, her face pale. The same niece who had called me a fat pig now stood before a room full of witnesses, watching her boss, the man she worshipped, bow his head in gratitude to me. It was the sweetest revenge, and yet it was only the beginning. Because I could see the panic flicker across Danielle's face, the cracks beginning to form in her perfect mask. Raymond turned back to me, his eyes still full of reverence. "Mariah, we need to talk. We need to catch up properly. Please, stay by my side tonight." He placed a hand on my arm, guiding me toward the front of the room as the crowd parted respectfully. And as I passed Danielle, I looked into her eyes, those wide, trembling eyes, and whispered just loud enough for her to hear. "Who invited the fat pig now?" Her lips trembled, but no words came. For the first time, she was the one silenced. Danielle stood frozen like a statue, her painted smile cracking under the weight of humiliation. She tried to laugh it off, a weak chuckle escaping her lips. "Oh, Mr. Carter must be mistaken," she stammered to the small cluster of colleagues still lingering around her. "That's just my aunt. She's not really important." But her words rang hollow. The truth was already written on every face in the room, important or not. Her boss had bowed before me, and no denial could erase that image from their minds. As Raymond and I moved through the room together, guests who had once avoided me now looked at me with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Executives nodded respectfully, introducing themselves. Women who had once giggled at Danielle's jabs now smiled politely in my direction. The air had shifted, and Danielle, who thrived on being the center of attention, was no longer the star. She was the shadow, dimmed by the light shining on me. I could feel her eyes burning holes into my back as Raymond guided me toward the main table. Dinner was served. The clinking of silverware filled the air, but conversation buzzed louder than the music. Raymond sat beside me, hanging on to every word I spoke. "Do you remember the old diner?" he asked, his voice soft. "You worked double shifts just so you could lend me that loan. Without you, I'd have nothing. I've never forgotten that." I smiled, though my heart ached with the memory. Yes, I remembered the diner. I remembered the aching feet, the grease-stained apron, the exhaustion. But I also remember the fire in Raymond's eyes when he told me about his dream. I had believed in him when no one else did, and now that belief had come full circle. Across the table, Danielle fidgeted, her fork clattering against her plate. Her colleagues glanced at her, whispering among themselves. Every word Raymond spoke of me was another nail hammered into the coffin of her pride. Finally, she leaned forward, her voice high-pitched and desperate. "Mr. Carter, I'm sure my aunt exaggerated her role. She's always been dramatic. She likes to make herself sound more important than she really is." The table went silent. All eyes turned to Raymond, waiting for his response. Raymond's face hardened, his smile fading. He set down his fork and turned slowly toward Danielle. "Exaggerated," he repeated, his voice low but sharp as glass. Danielle, I was there. I lived it. Your aunt saved me from bankruptcy. She saved this company before it was even born. She gave me a future when no one else cared if I survived. His words landed like thunder. Danielle's cheeks flushed crimson, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The table erupted into murmurs again, some guests shaking their heads at Danielle in disgust. She tried to force a laugh, waving her hand as though it were all a joke. "Oh, well, I suppose she did something," she said weakly. But the damage was done. Her attempt to belittle me had only magnified her own pettiness. She sat back in her chair, seething quietly, her wine glass trembling in her grip. For once, she was the one being laughed at, not out loud, but in whispers, in glances, in the silent judgment of every person at that table. As dessert was served, Raymond leaned closer to me, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Mariah, you must come by the office tomorrow. I want to discuss something with you, something important." His eyes gleamed with a mixture of respect and determination. I nodded softly, though my curiosity burned. Danielle overheard, of course. I saw the way her jaw tightened, her knuckles whitening around her fork. She had worked tirelessly to get into Raymond's good graces, and here he was, offering me an invitation she could only dream of. After the event ended, Raymond escorted me to the lobby personally, shaking my hand with both of his and promising to call in the morning. Cameras flashed, employees stared, and Danielle stood in the corner, her face pale, her eyes wide with barely contained rage. As I walked out into the cold night, the city lights glittering around me, I felt a surge of triumph. The girl who had called me a fat pig had just watched her boss bow before me. But something told me this was only the beginning of her unraveling. The next morning, my phone buzzed early. Raymond's name flashed across the screen. "Mariah," he said warmly, "I've been thinking all night. I want you on my advisory board. I need someone I can trust, someone who knows what it means to build from nothing. Please say yes." My heart pounded, but I kept my tone calm. "Yes, Raymond. I'd be honored." He laughed. "No, Mariah, you'd be doing me the honor." The call ended, but I knew one thing. Danielle's world was about to crumble. Later that day, Danielle stormed into my apartment unannounced, her heels pounding against the wooden floor like drums of war. Her eyes were blazing, her voice shrill. "What did you say to him?" she demanded. "What did you do to make him treat you like royalty? You're nothing but a washed-up, fat old woman, and you don't deserve this." Her words were fire, but I only smiled, leaning back in my chair. "Funny," I said quietly. "Your boss doesn't seem to agree." Danielle's face twisted, her eyes narrowing into slits as she leaned closer. "Don't think this means you've won," she hissed, her breath hot with rage. "You don't belong in his world. You don't belong in my world. You're just a burden who stumbled into luck." Her words were venom, but I only tilted my head, studying her like a predator studies prey. For the first time, she looked small to me, not because of her size, but because of her desperation. She was clinging to power like a drowning woman clings to driftwood, and I was the storm pulling her under. "You know what the problem with you is, Danielle," I said calmly, my voice low but sharp. "You mistake cruelty for strength. You think stepping on people makes you taller. But people like you always fall. And when you fall, it's never gentle, it's hard and it's loud." She blinked, her mouth opening in shock. She wasn't used to me fighting back. For years, I had been her punching bag, but now I was steel. She muttered something under her breath and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The very next day, whispers began floating through Raymond's company. Danielle, in her blind panic, had started spreading rumors. She told colleagues I was a fraud, that I was exaggerating my role in Raymond's past, that I was manipulating him. She painted me as a greedy relative trying to climb into power on the back of his generosity. But gossip is a dangerous weapon. It cuts both ways. For every person who whispered her lies, 2 others remembered the public humiliation she had already tried and failed to deliver. And Raymond was no fool. He had ears everywhere. Raymond called me later that week, his voice tinged with both irritation and amusement. "Mariah," he said, "I think Danielle's been busy. She's been slandering you left and right. But don't worry. I know the truth. I've known the truth since the day you saved me. Let her play her games. She'll only expose herself in the end." His confidence warmed me, but it also ignited something else: determination. Danielle thought she could destroy me with lies? Then perhaps it was time for her to face the truth she'd spent her life running from. I began gathering evidence, receipts, documents, memories carefully tucked away in old boxes. Proof of every dollar I had given Danielle over the years, every debt I had covered, every sacrifice I had made. Pictures of her at my table, eating the food I had scraped together while I went hungry. Letters she had written, begging me for money, for support, for second chances. I wasn't doing it for pity. I was building an arsenal. Because I knew the day was coming when she would push too far, and I would need to strike. Meanwhile, Danielle grew bolder. At work, she strutted around with fake confidence, but the cracks were visible. She was snappier with colleagues, dismissive in meetings, desperate to prove she was indispensable. But whispers spread, rumors that her rise wasn't due to talent, but favoritism. Some said she was losing her edge. Some said she was panicking. And I knew, with every rumor, with every slip, the walls were closing in around her. The breaking point came at a board meeting. Raymond had invited me to attend as a guest, and I sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany table, watching Danielle preen like a peacock. She presented her project, speaking with rehearsed arrogance, her eyes darting to Raymond for approval. But halfway through, she stumbled. The numbers didn't add up. The charts contradicted each other. A colleague raised a hand, questioning her math. Danielle's smile faltered. Another executive chimed in, pointing out inconsistencies. Soon, her entire presentation was unraveling before the board's eyes. I watched silently, my face calm, but inside, satisfaction bloomed. Danielle's arrogance had blinded her. She had cut corners, too busy scheming against me to do her work properly. And now, in the most important meeting of her career, she was crumbling. Raymond leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Danielle stammered, flipping through her notes, sweat beading on her forehead. The same niece who had once mocked me in front of a crowd was now the one trembling under judgment. When the meeting ended, Danielle stormed out, her heels clattering against the marble floor. I followed slowly, catching up with her in the lobby. She spun on me, her face red, her eyes wild. "You did this!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the hall. "You sabotaged me." People turned to stare. I folded my arms, my voice calm. "No, Danielle. You sabotaged yourself. All I did was watch." The fury in her eyes told me she wanted to strike, but she couldn't. Not here. Not now. That night, I received a message from Raymond. "Mariah," it read, "I think Danielle's time here is running short. I want to talk to you about taking a more permanent role in the company. Let's meet tomorrow." My lips curved into a smile as I set the phone down. Danielle had thrown stones at me for years, mocking my body, my worth, my very existence. But now, she was the one standing in a collapsing house. And tomorrow, I would be the one holding the final match. Danielle didn't sleep that night, at least, not peacefully. I knew because my phone buzzed at 2 a.m. with a series of texts from her. "You'll regret this. I know what you're trying to do. I'll make sure Raymond sees you for the liar you are." Each one dripped with panic. She was unraveling, her arrogance melting into raw fear. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Silence was a weapon sharper than words, and it burned her more than any insult I could hurl. The next morning, I dressed with deliberate care. A deep emerald green dress, simple but elegant, with gold earrings that caught the light. I wanted Danielle to see me not as the fat pig she had mocked, but as a woman who had learned to wear her scars like armor. When I arrived at Raymond's office, the staff greeted me warmly, their respect evident. Danielle was already there, pacing in the lobby, her makeup cracking under the weight of sleeplessness. Her eyes flicked up at me, filled with venom. "Enjoy while it lasts," she spat under her breath. Inside the office, Raymond stood to greet me, his smile genuine. "Mariah," he said warmly, "thank you for coming. Please sit." Danielle followed us in, uninvited, her heels clicking against the marble. She positioned herself by the window, arms crossed, glaring daggers in my direction. Raymond noticed but said nothing. He began, "I wanted to discuss the advisory board position with you, Mariah. Your experience, your wisdom, it's exactly what this company needs." Danielle scoffed loudly, interrupting. "Wisdom? What wisdom? She's nothing but an old woman who feeds off pity." The silence that followed was deafening. Raymond's jaw tightened. He turned slowly toward Danielle, his eyes cold. "Enough," he said firmly. "You will not speak about her that way in my presence again." Danielle's mouth fell open. "But Mr. Carter," she began, her voice trembling. He cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Do you have any idea who you're talking about? Without her, you wouldn't even have this company to work for. Without her, I'd be another failure story. You should be on your knees thanking her, not insulting her." Danielle's face turned scarlet. She sputtered, her words tumbling over each other. You can't just take her side. She's manipulating you. She's jealous of me." Raymond laughed, but it was not a kind laugh. It was sharp, bitter, the laugh of a man disgusted by arrogance. "Jealous? Danielle, you've been here 3 years. Mariah has been here in spirit for decades. Do you really think you compare?" His words cut deeper than any knife. Danielle staggered back slightly, as if the truth had physically struck her. But Danielle wasn't finished. Desperation makes fools of us all. She pulled a folder from her bag and slammed it on Raymond's desk. "Look! Proof! She doesn't deserve your trust. She's not who she says she is." Her hands shook as she flipped through documents, half-baked research, twisted narratives, things she had scraped together in the dead of night to paint me as a fraud. Raymond skimmed the first page, then the second. His eyes narrowed. He closed the folder slowly and pushed it back across the desk. "Danielle," he said coldly, "this isn't proof. This is garbage." Her breath caught. But, she stammered. Raymond stood, his height towering over her. "You disappoint me. You had promise, Danielle. But instead of working, instead of proving yourself, you've wasted your energy trying to destroy someone else. That is not what we value here." His voice was thunder. Danielle shrank under it, her eyes darting between him and me. For the first time, I saw fear. Not arrogance, not rage, but genuine fear in her eyes. She turned to me, suddenly, her voice breaking. "Please," she whispered, her hands trembling. "Tell him it's not true. Tell him I can still fix this. You raised me. You can't let this happen." Her words hit me like a ghost from the past, reminding me of the little girl who once clung to my dress, begging for protection. But that girl was gone, replaced by the woman who had mocked me, humiliated me, spat venom in my face. I looked at her, my expression calm, and said softly, "You called me a fat pig. You made me a nobody. Now watch what becomes of you." Raymond's decision came swift and merciless. "Danielle, pack your things. You're terminated immediately." Gasps echoed from the outer office, where staff had gathered, drawn by the raised voices. Danielle's knees buckled. She fell into the chair behind her face pale, her mascara running. No, you can't," she whispered, shaking her head violently. But the words held no power anymore. She had dug her grave, and now she was being buried in it. As security escorted her out, Danielle's eyes met mine one last time. They were wide, wet, filled with a mixture of rage and pleading. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice hoarse, her pride clinging to its final thread. But I only smiled, lifting my chin high. "No, Danielle. I already regret wasting years raising a serpent. Today I just cut off its head." And with that, she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hall. I sat back, the weight of years of humiliation lifting from my shoulders. For the first time, I felt not just vindicated, but free. Danielle disappeared for a few days after her public dismissal. But people like her don't vanish quietly. They re-emerge, clawing, desperate to regain control. And sure enough, on the fourth day, her name flashed across my phone. I didn't answer, of course. Seconds later, a message came through. You ruined me. But you don't know who you're dealing with. I'll destroy you. The irony made me laugh. Danielle still didn't understand. She was already destroyed. Everything she did now was just the ashes of a fire that had burned itself out. But Danielle wasn't done. By the end of the week, gossip sites began buzzing with scandal. Anonymous tips claimed that I was manipulating Raymond, that I was a greedy woman who had tricked her way into his trust. Pictures of me leaving the office circulated online, painted with captions dripping with venom. I knew whose hand was behind it. Danielle was lashing out, clawing at any rope she could find. But what she didn't realize was that lies don't survive long when the truth is strong enough to burn them. Raymond called me personally. His voice was calm, almost amused. Ignore her, he said firmly. My lawyers are already on it. Danielle doesn't understand the world she's entered. She thinks whispers can topple mountains, but she's forgotten you are the mountain. His words sent warmth rushing through me. For years I had been the one mocked, the one belittled. And now I was the one protected, shielded, respected. Danielle could spit poison into the wind, but all it would do was blow back into her own face. Still, I decided to prepare myself. I met with Raymond's legal team, providing them with the documentation I had gathered. Every receipt, every letter, every scrap of proof that I had been the backbone of both Danielle's upbringing and Raymond's beginnings. The lawyers smiled as they scanned through the evidence. This is airtight, one of them said. If she tries to drag you into court, she'll only humiliate herself further. I left the office that day with my head held high, a storm brewing in my chest, waiting for Danielle to take her next step. And she did. 2 weeks later, Danielle staged her most pathetic attempt yet. She showed up at a charity gala Raymond was hosting, uninvited, dressed in an expensive gown she clearly couldn't afford anymore. Cameras flashed as she marched across the floor, ignoring security, heading straight for me. The music faltered, the crowd murmured. There she is, Danielle shouted, pointing at me with trembling hands. The fraud, the liar, she ruined my life. Her voice cracked as tears streaked down her face, mascara running like black rivers. The room froze. For a moment, even I felt pity at the spectacle she had become. But then Raymond stood, his face thunder. Enough, Danielle! His voice boomed, silencing the murmurs instantly. You humiliate yourself more every day. Everyone here knows the truth. You're the one who bit the hand that raised you, mocked the woman who made you, and tried to bury the one person who ever believed in me. And now, you dare to call her a fraud. Gasps rippled through the audience. Danielle's face crumpled, but she tried again, her voice shaking. It's true. She's nothing but. Before she could finish, Raymond raised his hand. Security, remove her. But then, something unexpected happened. A reporter stepped forward from the crowd, microphone in hand. Wait, he said. I've done my own digging. And I found this. He held up a folder. My stomach tightened. What now? The reporter opened it and read aloud. Danielle owes over $50,000 in unpaid loans. She's been blacklisted by 3 banks, and she's been using her aunt's name to secure credit behind her back. Gasps erupted again, louder this time. Danielle's eyes went wide, her lips trembling. The room turned on her like wolves scenting blood. Cameras flashed. Whispers became shouts. She used her aunt's name? Fraud. After all Mariah did for her? Danielle's legs wobbled under the weight of the revelation. She tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Raymond's face darkened with fury. You stole from her, he demanded, his voice like a whip. Danielle's eyes brimmed with tears as she whispered, I just needed help. Security dragged her toward the exit as reporters swarmed, their cameras flashing like lightning, their voices firing questions like bullets. Danielle, is it true? Why did you betray your aunt? Do you regret mocking her? She covered her face with her hands, but the humiliation was already carved into her forever. 4 years, she had made me her public shame, her personal joke. And now, the world itself was laughing at her downfall. The fat pig she had mocked was now the queen sitting at the table, while she was thrown out into the cold. That night, as I stood beside Raymond at the gala, guests approached me with respect, their words full of admiration. "You must be proud," one whispered. "What strength," another said. And yet, I felt something deeper than pride. I felt justice. Danielle had tried to drown me in humiliation, but she had drowned herself instead. And as I looked out at the glittering chandeliers, the elegant gowns, and the camera still buzzing, I thought of Danielle's words that first night. Who invited the fat pig? A smile curved my lips as I whispered to myself, "The pig built the table." That's who. After the charity gala fiasco, Danielle's name was everywhere, but not in the way she wanted. Headlines screamed her shame. Disgraced employee exposed for fraud. CEO defends benefactor, niece humiliated, family betrayal ends in tears. Social media tore her apart. The same colleagues who once fawned over her success now distanced themselves, their posts filled with vague condemnations. I watched quietly from my apartment, sipping tea as news anchors dissected her fall. Clips of her being dragged out of the gala played on repeat, her tear-streaked face frozen in humiliation. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some from old friends congratulating me, others from strangers who admired my resilience. But I didn't gloat openly. Revenge is sweetest when it is savored in silence. Danielle had mocked me in public, so her destruction had to be public too. And now, the whole world was my witness. But humiliation alone wasn't enough for Danielle. In her desperation, she showed up at my apartment one rainy evening, soaked to the bone, mascara smeared like ink stains across her cheeks. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman who once strutted through boardrooms. She looked broken. "Aunt Maria," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, please help me." Her knees buckled, and she collapsed right at my doorstep. For a moment, I simply stood there, staring down at her. The same niece who had once sneered at me now knelt at my feet. I let her inside, not out of kindness, but out of curiosity. I wanted to hear what desperation would sound like on her tongue. She sat shivering in my living room, clutching a mug of tea I had reluctantly placed in her hands. "They've taken everything," she sobbed. "My job, my reputation, my credit. I can't get another job. Everyone looks at me like I'm filth. Please, you're the only one who can save me." Her words were heavy with irony. The same woman who called me nobody was now calling me her only hope. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on her. "Save you," I said quietly. "Why would I? You spent years mocking me, Danielle. Years calling me names, humiliating me in front of others. Do you remember the gala? Do you remember the night you pointed at me and said, 'Who invited the fat pig?'" Her shoulders shook, her sobs louder now. "I didn't mean it," she whispered. "I was just insecure. I was jealous. You always had something I didn't have." Her confession made me laugh, a cold sound that filled the room. "Jealous?" I asked. "Of what?" "My weight, my humiliation, my struggles." She shook her head violently. "No, your strength, your ability to survive everything. I thought if I tore you down, it would make me bigger. But it only made me small. Please, Aunt Maria, give me another chance." Her words dripped with desperation, but I had learned long ago that crocodile tears don't wash away poison. Still, I decided to test her. "All right," I said slowly, my eyes narrowing. "If you want another chance, prove it. Go public. Admit everything. Tell the world the truth, that you mocked me, betrayed me, and stole from me. Clear my name completely, and maybe then I'll consider forgiving you." Her eyes widened in horror. "Publicly? I can't." Her voice trailed off, trembling. Of course she couldn't. Pride still chained her. Even at rock bottom, she clung to the tattered remains of her ego. "Then leave," I said flatly, standing to my feet. You came here for mercy, but mercy belongs to the humble. And you're not humble yet, Danielle. She begged again, clutching at my dress, her tears soaking into the fabric. But I shook her off, cold and unmoved. She left that night with her shoulders hunched, her figure swallowed by the rain. Watching her walk away, I felt no guilt. This was the same girl who had delighted in my pain. Now, she was simply tasting her own medicine. The next morning, the headlines grew worse for her. A whistleblower at her former company released emails showing how Danielle had manipulated colleagues, stolen credit for others' work, and even falsified reports. Her career wasn't just over, it was obliterated. She became a cautionary tale, the kind they teach interns about during orientation. Don't be like Danielle. The once polished star was now nothing more than a warning. As I watched her name spiral further into disgrace, I realized my revenge was nearly complete. Danielle had wanted the world to laugh at me. Instead, the world was laughing at her. But still, a part of me knew there was one final act to play. Because Danielle wasn't just any enemy. She was blood. And sometimes, the cruelest revenge isn't destruction, it's forcing them to confront the truth they've run from their entire lives. And that moment was coming. The city smelled of rain and hot asphalt the morning the final hearing was set. Danielle had been served with suit papers, not only civil suits from former colleagues, but an unexpected criminal probe because of the falsified documents that had surfaced. Her world had become a small, rattling box of phone calls from collectors and curt emails from lawyers. She arrived at the courthouse in sunglasses and a trembling smile, hoping the public would still see the polished surface she had once perfected. Cameras circled like sharks. People craned for a look at the fallen star who had once sneered at a relative she'd called a pig. I watched from a distance, hands folded, feeling the old ache in the new iron. This was the moment the world would decide whether she would be merely punished or learn something deeper. Inside the courtroom, Danielle took the stand with a face rehearsed to be contrite. Her voice shook as she offered apologies that sounded like scripts. Reporters scribbled. Live feeds streamed her every blink. But this scene was not solely about her humiliation. It was about truth. Under oath, facts unspooled, loans taken in my name, forged signatures, emails showing solicitation and deceit. Every document hit like a strike against the castle of lies she'd built to prop herself up. I sat quietly while truth, slow and inexorable, did its work. Watching her slide from bravado to pleading was not pleasure, it was confirmation that real consequences had teeth. Outside the courtroom, a small crowd gathered. Some wanted spectacle, others wanted justice. A few remembered kindnesses I had given, meals, rides, listening ears, and they whispered that this fall had been long overdue. A woman whose child I'd helped years ago hugged me gently and said nothing. Her eyes said enough. I thought about the little acts that make a life, the nights I worked, the days I saved, the tiny loans I gave. Those acts were invisible until someone tried to tear them down, and then suddenly they were the scaffolding of an entire story. Danielle, now exposed, had no scaffolding left. The judge's gavel finally landed. Sentencing would come later, but reputations were already sentenced by the world's eyes. Danielle slumped in her chair, shoulders folding under the weight of exposure. She clutched at her bag like a talisman. For a heartbeat, memory flickered in her face, the child who'd clung to my apron strings, the nights she'd begged for help. It was a small, human flicker, and it barely survived the barrage of shame. When she looked up, her eyes met mine. There was no defiance left, only a raw, naked plea she didn't have the courage to say aloud. After the hearing, people approached me, some with pity, some with congratulations, others with awkward attempts to bridge the chasm that had opened between our families. I accepted condolences with the same quiet dignity I'd learned to carry. I had no desire to gloat. Revenge had never been about spectacle for me. It had been about truth asserted, dignity reclaimed. Yet as the city lights came on and the courthouse emptied, I felt the old loneliness press against me. Power returned, estates restored, those were visible. But what I wanted most now was a small, less theatrical thing, peace. Danielle, in the days that followed, made a last desperate bid for sympathy. She wrote a public apology video, a shaky, tearful confession in which she blamed pressure and insecurity, asking to be forgiven. The clip went viral for a different reason. People mocked the performative sorrow of a woman who had once publicly humiliated the very person now offering help. Comments flooded in with sarcasm and cold empathy. Some offered her therapy resources. Others posted clips of her earlier cruelty. The chorus was complicated, and for once she had no unified chorus cheering her on. She had burned too many bridges. One evening, 3 weeks after the hearing, she showed up at my door again. Not with the swagger of entitlement, but with the straight, careful steps of someone who had learned how brittle the world can be. Rain soaked her hair, her suit hung loose and cheap. She begged, this time without grand proclamations, crouching on the stoop, palms raw, asking for a job, for a referral, for a chance to prove she'd changed. The plea landed different than before. It was small and human. My heart listened. The old part of me, the part that had fed her when she was little, wanted to open the door. But trust, once burned, is slow to kindle. That night I paced my small kitchen, the house quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Memories sprung in jagged flashes. Danielle's childhood cramps when we couldn't afford medicine, the little graduation party with paper plates, the way she had once wanted to be a singer and practiced in the mirror. The pain of betrayal sat beside these soft recollections, forming a complicated ledger. I thought of mercy and justice as two hands weighing the same life. Which would I offer? A job that could feed her pride but risk her repeating old harms, or a stern lesson that might finally teach humility? I made a decision that felt like the one true act of my life. Not vindictive, not cruel, but strategic and humane. I would give Danielle a narrow door, work under supervision in a service role that required humility, accountability, and transparency. No power, no keys to the kingdom, just honest labor and oversight. If she failed, the doors would close forever. If she succeeded, she might rebuild, not on theft and lies, but on earned trust. It was a path to redemption, not rescue. That distinction mattered. It honored both the wound she'd caused and the person I used to soothe. When I offered her the terms, she wept, not the sharp, performative tears of earlier stunts, but real, sullen tears that seemed to belong to someone waking up from a long, foolish dream. She accepted the job with a bowed head, trembling promises, and a single whispered, "Thank you." I left her standing on my stoop with a plastic bag of secondhand clothes and 2 bus passes, feeling the odd ache of someone who had given shelter but had not surrendered dignity. The city swallowed us both in its hum, one woman returning to a life of careful power, the other beginning the slow, uncertain climb of humility. Outside, the neon signs flickered, and for the first time since that banquet, the phrase "who invited the fat pig" sounded faint, almost ridiculous, because the real story had been written in the long, quiet ledger of deeds and choices. Danielle's first days at the service job I had arranged were like watching a queen forced to scrub her own floors. She worked at a local women's shelter, scrubbing counters, folding clothes, and serving meals. Her manicured nails chipped, her designer heels replaced with plain sneakers. Some of the women recognized her from the news. Whispers followed her as she carried trays and emptied trash cans. She flushed with shame but kept working. For the first time, Danielle was in a space where nobody bowed, nobody fawned, and nobody cared who her boss used to be. I visited the shelter one afternoon, curious to see her progress. From a corner, I watched Danielle serve soup to a woman with tired eyes and 3 children clinging to her skirts. The woman murmured a soft "thank you," and Danielle, after a pause, whispered back, "You're welcome." It was awkward, stilted but real. I saw the faintest flicker of humility in her face, the tiniest crack in the fortress of pride she had lived inside for years. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was a seed. Still, her temper had not died completely. One evening, the shelter manager called me. She snapped at a volunteer. The woman said gently, "She's struggling to adjust, but I can tell she's trying." I hung up with a sigh, torn between anger and pity. This was the same girl who had laughed at me mercilessly in front of strangers. Yet here she was, being forced to serve those she once would have mocked. Perhaps this was the only language life could use to teach her. Weeks passed. Danielle's name faded from the news cycle, replaced by fresher scandals. Her fall was no longer front-page gossip, but the people who knew her whispered still. The shame lingered like smoke. One night, she appeared at my door again, not begging this time, but quiet. She placed an envelope on my table. Inside was a handwritten letter, not grand, not performative, but painfully honest. I don't know how to undo the hurt I've caused you. I don't know how to erase the words I said. I called you a nobody, but the truth is, I was the one who was empty. Thank you for not letting me drown. Even if I never earn your forgiveness, I will keep trying. I read the letter twice, my hands trembling. 4 years, I had longed for her acknowledgement, her admission that she had wronged me. Now here it was, scrawled in ink stained with smudges that looked like tears. For the first time in decades, I felt something soften inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. Revenge had given me satisfaction, but her humility gave me something rarer, peace. Raymond called me soon after. "Mariah," he said, "I heard what you did for her. You gave her a chance when you could have buried her completely. That's the difference between strength and cruelty. That's why I trust you." His words echoed in my chest. Strength and cruelty, Danielle had always mistaken one for the other. Perhaps my real revenge wasn't her downfall. Perhaps it was showing her the difference. But life wasn't a straight path. One afternoon at the shelter, Danielle overheard another woman whisper, "Isn't that the fat everyone was laughing about?" The old Danielle would have lashed out, would have clawed her way to superiority. Instead, she lowered her eyes and said, "Yes, but she's the one feeding me now." The volunteer recounted the moment to me later, and I realized humility was sinking in. Slowly, painfully, but surely. That night, I lay awake replaying the arc of it all. From the gala where she called me a pig, to the boardroom where Raymond defended me, to the courtroom where her lies collapsed, to the shelter where she scrubbed pots. Life had written a full circle. I had sought revenge, and I had received it. But in the ashes of that revenge, something else was rising, a truth that was sharper than any insult. Dignity endures. No matter how many times it is mocked, crushed, or buried, it will always resurface. Months later, Danielle approached me with trembling hands and a new kind of voice. It wasn't arrogant, it wasn't desperate, it was steady, even if fragile. "Aunt Maria," she said softly, "I know I don't deserve it, but will you ever forgive me?" I studied her face. She wasn't the glittering, arrogant niece who had mocked me. She wasn't the broken woman dragged out of a gala. She was someone new, someone learning, someone scarred but still human. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness was not a gift for her. It was a release for me. So I took a breath, my eyes stinging with tears. "Danielle," I whispered, "I forgive you. Not because you earned it, but because I refuse to carry your sin any longer." Her knees buckled as she sobbed, clutching my hands like she had when she was a child. And in that moment, the revenge story ended, not with another fall, but with a broken girl finally understanding the weight of her cruelty and an old woman finally free of its burden. The months that followed were quieter. Danielle kept her head low, working at the shelter long after her required term had ended. The arrogance that once burned in her eyes was replaced with something new, patience. She learned to serve without expecting applause, to listen without interrupting, to clean without complaint. I visited occasionally, always from a distance. And each time, I saw a little more of the niece I once knew. Not the cruel woman who mocked me, but the little girl who had once clung to my hand. The city slowly forgot Danielle's scandal, but those who remembered still whispered. For me, though, it didn't matter. I had no interest in the world's memory. My interest was in peace, in finally living without the weight of humiliation pressing on my chest. The humiliation was hers now, carved into her reputation, a scar she would never fully escape. But for me, the scar had healed. The laughter that once haunted me had lost its sting. Because I had seen her bow, I had seen her crumble, and I had seen her change. One evening, she knocked on my door again, but this time she wasn't begging. She carried a notebook, worn and dog-eared. "Aunt Maria," she said softly, "I've been writing. About everything. My mistakes, my pride, the lessons I've learned. I want you to read it." I opened the notebook later that night and found raw confessions in shaky handwriting. I thought power was in belittling others. I thought beauty was in being thinner, richer, louder. But I see now, true strength is survival, humility, and kindness. I destroyed myself, and she saved me. Tears blurred my vision as I read. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the pain she had caused. But it was honest. And honesty, even in broken words, is a kind of redemption. I closed the book and set it aside, my heart heavy but lighter than it had been in years. Revenge had been my fire, but redemption was my water. Together, they balanced me. For the first time in decades, I felt whole. Raymond called again one afternoon. "Maria," he said warmly, "we're hosting another gala soon. This time I want you to speak. Not about me, not about the company, but about resilience. About dignity. The world needs to hear your story." I hesitated at first. Public speaking had never been my desire. But then I remembered the laughter, the whispers, the humiliation. And I thought, perhaps it's time to reclaim the stage. Not as the butt of a joke, but as the voice of a lesson. The night of the gala, the ballroom shimmered again with chandeliers and polished marble. But this time, I wasn't seated at the edge, clutching a napkin in shame. I stood at the podium, my voice steady, my heart unshaken. "They once called me a nobody," I said, my words carrying through the silence. "They once laughed at my size, my struggle, my scars. But dignity doesn't live in your weight or your wealth. It lives in your endurance, in your quiet sacrifices, in your refusal to break when the world tries to crush you." The audience erupted in applause, not pity but respect. Cameras flashed, faces glistened with tears, and among them, at the very back of the room, stood Danielle. She didn't clap loudly or try to draw attention. She simply bowed her head, her hands folded, her shoulders trembling. It wasn't humiliation this time. It was acknowledgement. The tables had turned completely, no longer me bowing under her cruelty, but her bowing to the truth of who I was. After the speech, Raymond shook my hand firmly. "You've given them more than a story," he said. "You've given them a mirror." I smiled faintly, because I knew he was right. Danielle had been my mirror once, the reflection of cruelty I had to face, the test I had to survive. And now, she was her own mirror, forced to live with the reflection of her choices. That night, as I walked home under the city lights, I whispered the words that had once broken me. "Who invited the fat pig?" I let them roll off my tongue one last time, and then I laughed, loud, free, unburdened. Because I knew the answer now. The fat pig wasn't the insult Danielle had hurled. It was the survivor who had fed her, clothed her, raised her, and ultimately taught her the hardest lesson of her life. The pig was the foundation, the strength, the truth. And so, my story ended not with bitterness, but with clarity. Revenge had given me justice, but forgiveness gave me freedom. Danielle's humiliation had been spectacular, but her brokenness had been necessary. She had tried to make me invisible, but in the end, she made me unforgettable. And the world, once laughing at me, was now listening. My name, my dignity, my legacy would outlive the whispers. I had turned mockery into triumph, scars into wisdom, and betrayal into a crown. The fat pig had become the queen. And there, my beautiful people, was my story. If it moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it.